Manjula Sridhar. She is going to tell us about identity and access management, um, what is it, and how is it progressing the new age identity access management. Manjula?
Hello, everyone. Am I audible? Okay. Yeah, they're supposed to project it. Okay, while they're projecting the PPT, the topic is, as you know, quite vast and diverse, right? And I have a flight to catch at 6 o'clock. So in 30 minutes, I'll try to cover the gist of it as much as possible. And of course, this is a community forum, so we can keep continuing the discussion online, emails, and whatever. And good that Arnab is the chair of this session. Arnab, as some of you may know, is an expert implementer, and he has implemented many of the IAM product suites. So while I cover the macro view, if there are any in-detail question about implementation, Arnab can chip in as well. Okay. How do I navigate? No. Yeah. Okay, so a bit of my background before we begin. I'm currently bootstrapping a startup called ArcByte, which is a security for individuals. Right now, there's a big gap in that space. There's a big experiment still in an early stage. Earlier to that, I used to work for CA, which I joined after the acquisition of Arcot. I used to head sales for authentication and fraud analytics product line in Arcot. After joining CA, I moved back to engineering, where I led integration of a startup called Orchestria, which is a DLP product that CA acquired in UK. After that, I quit and started that. In my previous roles, I was the founder of Augus Networks. Some of you may know it. I was the CTO and founder. Prior to all this entrepreneurship and sales, I was a hardcore techie, working in US Lucent Networks for about 6 years. That's where my real exposure to IAM concepts began, actually. If you really look at it, telecom is one of the biggest identity management network that is there, right? The core concepts are same in the network arena. They get, manifested differently, right? So let's get into the topic. As I mentioned earlier, this is a really, really complex space, right? The complexity is not just due to the technology involved, but also because the space has grown quite organically, and multiple technologies got involved, and all of them kind of independently evolved and became what is known as IAM, right? And in fact, I understand in the last 2 years, this whole space is come to be known as identity, governance, and administration. And as per Gartner, the definition of IGA, which is IAM plus, if you like to call it, is a combination of two of their earlier domains, which is user provisioning and administration, plus identity governance based, right? But what really matters is that, right, on the right-hand side, which is basically set of functionalities which any IAM should provide. Do you guys agree with that? Or is there something missing here? Are there some other functionalities which should be part of this? Is it? Okay, so I'll just keep reading it, right? So one of the core thing obviously is identity lifecycle, which basically deals with provisioning of the user and deprovisioning of the user, right? The workflows related to creation of the user, authorizations and automation of that. Second space is access request, including self-service. So some new person enters the domain and they want to create identity for themselves. How do they do it? That facility. And risk scoring with respect to creation of the user and providing access to that user. Policy enforcement, what are the various policies across the organization which needs to be automatically enforced when a user identity traverses through provisioning and deprovisioning. Of course, role management, people have various groups, roles, and various entitlement with respect to access to resources. How do you manage it and how effectively you manage with respect to that? And then, of course, identity analytics. One simple analytic aspect is number of employees or users versus number of identities, right? So simple things like that, but also very complex aspect with respect to usage, entitlements, all of that. So that forms sort of the core part of, sure? Can you define what recertification is in terms? Yeah, so, yeah, agreed. So it's part of the access request, self-service, and risk scoring, right? While, yeah, I agree with you, the certification is part of the whole thing, yeah. Yeah, so this is one of the things I struggled with when I'm creating this slide, right? There are a lot of terms which are used in a very, very, fluid context. And sometimes they're used at a macro level, and then they break it into little independent functionalities and all that, right? So if you look at roles and entitled management, which is a continuous activity, which refers to what you're talking about, as well as reporting and then segregation of duties is completely different thing. So I deliberately left out some of those terms, and there are 3 or 4 which were part of the Gartner particular minute roles, but I have not added those things. And then there is the standard term IDaaS, which is Identity as a Service, which is basically all of this as part of service. By and large, this definition is okay with you? Okay. So on top of it, there are additional software components, which are sometimes are point solutions, sometimes become part of the IAM suite. It depends on the implementation and how our vendor is bundling these solutions. First thing is obviously advanced authentication. This goes beyond regular authentication where you're looking at managing the compromised identities. Includes hardware, software, PKI, and biometric and all those things. Authorization sometimes gets again bundled with the authentication solution, but there are specific, as we were talking about earlier, machine learning, behavioral analytics, all of it, which comes as part of authorization or risk analytics, right? So that becomes part of that. And repositories, especially with respect to newer sort of directories that are getting formed out there. For example, Microsoft released the Azure directory, which is directory as a SaaS model. With that, this has again come back into focus. But it's nothing but a central repository of all the user identities out there. And then Federation SSO, slightly different, but sometimes get combined. Single sign-on, obviously, most of you are aware. How do you reduce the number of logins a user has to do while accessing various applications? Whereas Federation is how do you trust your partners and domains which are dependent on your domain and provide a trust-based identities using identity provider model. And then finally, privileged identity, which is gaining a lot of traction now, given the number of hacks and the incidences that has happened in the last few years. A significant chunk of them were traced to a misuse of privileged identity. So that has again gained a lot of traction, and which was always there. Again, this is one of the core component of what IAM is. Obviously, it's very complex, and I thought this slide, which somehow doesn't seem to have the gray area, some problem with that. Okay, so the corner, starting with enterprise SSO to password management and the authentication service, that whole corner, the bottom corner, is a square which is supposed to be the foundational services for IAM. The rest of them are part of the advanced functionalities. But as you can see, there's a business value on one side and risk reduction on the other side. And this, I don't have to justify it to you. Some of the very high-end security implementation need not have to be directly related to business value. They reduce risk, they reduce specific types of threats, but business value is something which directly reduces the cost of operation or enables customer experiences. Is this fair enough?
So how to read it? Sorry.
Yeah, so I don't know, why is that gray thing not coming out? So okay. So from here till here, this is a rectangle, right? Somehow. So that rectangle is the core thing. No matter what kind of IAM solution you have, you need to have that. So that is your base risk reduction and base business value.
I think it's the fundamentals now.
Yeah. Yeah, it is there. Unfortunately, because of the light, it's not coming up. Okay, so that's just the definitions, right? And how do we read that definition in the context of the global trends? Right? Some of the global trends which you're all familiar with, I don't need to really get into that, but at a high level, right? Social media, I mean, the previous panel was talking about how social media is playing havoc in some of the GRC and SIEM kind of activities, as well as mobile, obviously BYOD and all that, and then cloud. So all three will have tremendous impact on IAM, right, and your strategy. And the global trend also seems to be there is increased federation because the organizations themselves have become quite amorphous. There's no clear-cut boundary in terms of who accesses an organizational domain. And then perimeterless and all those standard things. Identity brokers are becoming one of the core aspects of the modern networks. Analytics and risk-based control, right? What seems to be going down, it is not just immediately, but the trends are there. Role-based access control, which fixes access to a particular person or a particular role. Central directory, which is also important. And in all this concept of hardware, software tokens, and then internal on-premise IDMs, right? These are some of the trends. These are global trends, and also, when I say global, it is all sorts of company, right? New age, internet, B2C, all of it. However, with respect to this current session, we'll focus it on the B2B, which is also, I think, at the end, the intention of this session is to kind of come up with a prescriptive model for Indian B2B companies. So this is the background under which we have to decide where we stand, right? So how do we decide where do we stand? Do you folks do a lot of assessments with respect to IAM alone in the companies? Right? Do you use particular models?
Quadrant is something which is general for
So it's all proprietary.
not specifically for IAM,
Huh.
It covers IT security and information security and hence covers the IAM part.
Okay, all right. So obviously there are multiple standards. And as you said, sometimes it's not just IAM, it covers the overall security. But this talk we try to attempt to provide a particular framework to deal with IAM alone. And as you can see from the earlier definition, IAM itself is really vast, right? It includes so many other disciplines. General CMM, COBIT, and all those models are there. But what we have found and what also the experts and analysts say is having a very, very specific model to suit your organization is what is the most preferred way, right? Gartner proposes capability maturity model, which is used in the software organizations anyway for many of the generic readiness and maturity assessment for the companies. But as you can see, it's really quite complex. So one of the view which is provided, which I thought was really interesting for us is, focus on just processes, automation, level of management and SLAs, and rate against what it means to be under various maturity model. As you all know, going to optimized is really ideal. Most of us want to be in the managed or a defined space. With respect to Indian organizations, what do you think is the norm here? Are we at repeatable, defined? What's the general perception with respect to IAM? Anybody? All right. Yeah, right. All right. So we have some findings. I mean, CISO platform obviously did a lot of work, conducting a lot of surveys in the background. I will present it at the end of it. I just wanted to gauge the audience at this point. Right, so based on these models, so far what we have done, we have defined the space. These are the functionalities, and these are the advanced features. We have also defined what core IAM and what advanced IAM is. Couple that with the trends in the global world as to how the whole identity space is moving. And then we have some idea of what are the maturity models against which we kind of need to assess ourselves and then figure out what the needs are. So that's where we come to the needs assessment, right? Needs assessment is basically trying to understand what you really want. While implementation of IAM is given, in terms of how do we look at this solution? One basic question is, are we ready for cloud implementation, right? Sometimes this can be a political question, but with respect to savings in the cost and efficiency and quick implementation of solution, that's the way to go. So needs involve all aspects of this. And then what are the various application that needs to be included? If it is a cloud application, does this IAM solution have a plugin or a connector for these kind of things? I mean, all of these needs will become the input for your vendor evaluation, right? Should we go for a point or a full platform? Full platform typically is something that covers the first two slides I explained, right? Core functionality as well as the advanced, including privileged identity. And then, of course, with the global trends and looking at where your organization itself is going, you can figure out what are the needs, not just now, in the next 5 years. Plus, obviously, the most important one, budget and size, etc. So CPI, our CISO platform, we also created a couple of questionnaires, both with respect to needs and readiness. Readiness obviously derives from your CMM or any other framework that you're following. And needs comes from answering some of these key questions, plus other questionnaires that we have put in there. Any questions so far? So vendor selection criteria, obviously, this is quite important. Product architecture, as I said, is it on-premise, is it cloud, and all sorts of other things. And one of the key things to look at is given your set of applications, whether this product supports connectors and plugins and immediate implementation. Deployment and management support, right? Many of these software is quite complex unless you have a dedicated support and sometimes hand-holding, it would be very hard to implement it, right? And also once the implementation is done, do you have the managed support for managing this product? That's something else that needs to be taken care of. And some of the IAM requirements, even in terms of creation of the roles, how the requests flow, are highly business specific, right? What may be very pertinent in healthcare may not be relevant in financial world, right? So if you have a very specific need that arises from the needs assessment, and if there is a vertical specific solution, probably going for the vertical specific solution is a better option for you. And interoperability, obviously, everyone has a legacy, and budget and sometimes operational requirement doesn't allow you to throw away those things. So will the new product or this product support interacting with them very easily is something that one needs to look at. Product security, if it's cloud especially, very, very important, but also internally also, how does it deal, what models, what threat models it works under. And finally, pricing. I mean, I don't have to explain that. So based on that, CPA also created evolution checklist, which is basically under 3 categories, based on functionality, commercial, and management support. I believe they are on the CISO platform, or they will be put under CISO platform website also. Obviously, it's a community effort. Take a look at it, and if something needs to be added, feel free to add it there. So this was theory. I mean, whatever I explained so far gave a background of this whole thing. So next few slides, we'll talk about vendors, both from what analysts are talking about, and then we'll come to what CPI found out based on the survey conducted of Indian CISOs. I think because Arnav will give you more information as to how the whole process and the methodology and everything. But we have the findings. I'll present it to you in a bit. Obviously, for the first is this IDaaS as a solution. Anyone using any of these solutions here? Okta, okay. Anybody else? Is cloud-based IAM popular in India? Still not, no? Yeah, okay. IGA, obviously, usual suspect because it's nothing but classic IAM plus some things. So some modification from the original IAM has happened. Some leaders have become challengers and visionaries and all that. I also decided to include 2 other things which are important, especially what we found from an Indian context and also a general business context for IAM is authentication, because that's very, very important with respect to managing the privileged users. And privileged identity vendors itself. It's not a magic quadrant, but just a general guide of all the privileged identity managers. Most of the other functionalities like authorization, directory services, and a couple of others are included in some of these other quadrant vendors. So I didn't include that specifically. And there doesn't also seem to be a special list of vendors for. There's some for Federation and Web SSO, but that's all pretty sketchy. So I decided to include that. So based on all this, this is the final slide, which is kind of crux of what all we discussed. And then, keeping in the values of CISO platform. How do we arrive at this for this context of the audience, right? So these are the ones on the left-hand side is what is very, very relevant to Indian audience based on the ratings that practitioners in India has provided, and we combine that with the analyst ratings, and whichever scored high are the first three, followed by the yellow box, which is, they've scored high but not as high as the other. It's not greater than 10. And the rest remaining ones are there. This is just purely Indian context at this point of time. Any questions?
Given your experience, ma'am, IAM is one of the key growth components in the cloud adoption also.
Right.
This is said and well done.
Correct.
In Australia and New Zealand, more than 80% of cloud adoption is there because there is the robustness of IAM is there.
Correct.
Worldwide figures also says that the one biggest revenue generator in the cloud would be IAM.
Agreed. Yeah.
So on the cloud, with your IAM experience, background, and CA, and so much of research that you have, what is the platform which is actually increasingly getting adopted other than in India? Indian clouds are still maturing, but with your experience in US and cloud,
Right. I mean,
the IAM platform which is being very successfully used in the cloud area.
yeah, so, I mean, the Magic Quadrant really talks about it, right? I mean, it includes the revenue also as part of that. And with respect to cloud-based IAM, Okta seems to be the leader. That's what, but with respect to, I mean, I don't have a practical knowledge of who is really using cloud-based IAM at this point of time, because it's really, I mean, whatever the view I have is given to my professional engagement. It's not a scientific survey. Yeah, sure.
Okay, so this is an interesting one. I've been involved into creating an IDaaS service for BT, and what I found while doing my research is that a cloud-based identity service is accepted where the source of identity trust is high. So if you see the country like Australia or England or in USA, there had been a survey, and they found that telecom companies followed by the financial services are probably the most trusted source of identity because of the rating system and the way they manage the identity. By the way, government came in that survey to be the lowest one. So that's, I think, is the primary reason why cloud-based identity are being accepted in those countries, because of the way the identity being created and weighted. The trust level on them are very high, which is unfortunately not the case in India. However, with UIDI, I think that's probably the first step forward.
My question was from a perspective, for example, I'm going to Azure, suppose I'm building my entire non-critical, whatever, 80% of my computing power over there.
Yeah.
What kind of IAM platform would be reasonably good for us?
Okay.
With your experience.
Right. Yeah, sure.
So I was just reading up.
Answered the trusted,
Yeah. So
similar to the public PK architecture,
right. Yeah. So for Azure itself, I think Microsoft itself has come up with the IAM platform, right? And it's probably easier for you to integrate because they would have provided. I mean, this is just my personal opinion. Yeah. No, but the.
we are actually came up with the unique cloud architecture at Conference.
Okay.
Your experiences, we can plug in the best of the IAM platform into it.
Sure, we can discuss offline. We'll definitely. But whatever I've read about Azure and used a bit, it seems to be a really good platform.
I did say that I'm using Okta, but I'm going to migrate from Okta to now Azure ESS. Because whatever now, not earlier, whatever Microsoft is offering is as compared to Okta now. So that is where I have a plan to migrate to Azure.
All right, thank you. I need to close now. And I'm on CISO.